Hi, I don't know what happened to the to the taping of that last part of the video, but it was almost done. I don't want to tape the whole thing over again. So I'm just going to this is a very short video ending up the war. George Washington after Yorktown does not disband the army because he's worried about the British possibly starting something again, and there are still British troops scattered around. So he keeps the army together. So technically the fighting, most of it ends in 1781, but the peace treaty is not signed till 1783. So this is really an 8-year war that goes on. The Peace of Paris, the treaty at the end of the American Revolution, is a very interesting document. If you look at slide 58, 59 on that PowerPoint, we have, of course, Ben Franklin, who is a huge figure during the war. We have John Adams and we have John Jay in Paris. All parties in the war had to agree, and it was a very diplomatic, very tricky maneuver because the Spanish, the Dutch, the French, the English, and the Americans are all involved. There was no separate peace between Britain and America. All of them had to agree, so all of them have to get something out of this, basically. Peace treaty, the map, the next slide is something to look at very carefully. All land east of the Mississippi that had been former British territory is now American. This now belongs to America, except for Florida, which went to Spain. Land west of the Mississippi went to Spain as well. Britain debated, should we give it to France back? Should we give it to Spain? Well, they were more worried about France than Spain. Spain was a declining power. We'll give it to Spain. And remember that New Orleans and Louisiana are west of the Mississippi River. So Spain now gets New Orleans. The first thing they did was close the port of New Orleans. Britain did keep her islands in the Caribbean, her sugar islands, which was what she really wanted out of it. They were more valuable than the 13 colonies. There were fishing rights in the Atlantic that Americans and Britain and other nations had, that they were open to nations. The Georges Banks are one of the most lucrative and profitable and productive fishing areas in the world, and these fishing rights were retained. It was very important then, it's not so much now. The debts, interesting, this comes up again in the early republic. The debts, the United States, the new United States, was supposed to collect the debts owed to British citizens. So if there were war debts or unpaid bills, the new US government was supposed to be responsible for those. The new US government, of course, having no money at all, left it to the states, and the states basically didn't collect most of those debts. So British citizens and loyalists who lost property, who lost money during the war, most of them were not repaid because they just never got to it. 36,000 American deaths from about 200,000 adult males who served. 36,000 American deaths was 1% of the population. And again, the percentage of males that served was about 50%. So this was a fairly high death rate at the time. What happened to the Loyalists? 100,000 left, more or less. They went to Canada, they went to British islands in the Caribbean. Some of them returned to Britain. When they left, they took over 4,000 slaves that had served in the British Army with them. They kept their word to the slaves. They were freed and they were removed. The Loyalists who stayed, not a great idea to stay if you had been loyal to Britain throughout the war. There was a lot of bitter feelings. There were a lot of deaths and suffering during the war. A few were hung, a few were executed or killed by American mobs. Many lost their property, particularly large landed estates. They were confiscated by the state, the new state, the former colony. Many of the states never compensated the British. So after the war, there's a lot of land open for settlement because big estates, particularly in the South, were now open for smaller property owners to buy. The British, when they left Philadelphia, left it pretty trashed. Houses were burned. There was garbage in the streets. There was a lot of bitter resentment after this. For years later, loyalists and people who spoke fondly of Britain were attacked. It was better to leave. Some American deserters who had left the American army and deserted, they went to Canada too. That was not a good thing to stay in America, or they just wanted to be out of range. Canada, when they showed up, gave rations to them and gave help to American deserters. They gave them food, tools, and 200 acres of free land. So there's actually an incentive, if you were pro-British, to move to Canada. And a number did, several thousand did. So that is the end of the war. We will move on into, of course, the big problem now. We won the war. Now what? What do you do now? You have to set up a government from scratch with no experience in this at all. Stay safe out there. Sorry it turned into 2 little choppy videos, but I don't know what happened with that. Take care.